All right. Well, welcome to another and special episode of the Red Pill Christians podcast. So, tonight is the eve of the election night here in America. For those of you outside of the States, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm sorry for the shit show that is probably going to happen and has already been a train wreck for the last year plus. So, buckle up. It's going to be exciting. Tonight, we are talking about everything political in general. We're talking about the election, what we think might happen, what we might be able to do about that. It's going to be an interesting and free-flowing conversation. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into that. So, gentlemen, we all live in different areas of the country, so we're going to have a little bit of different perspectives on some things. What would be how would you describe kind of the temperature of the political situation where you're at? You don't have to say where you're at specifically, but if you can give a general regional kind of overview, that would be helpful to our listeners.
People are flying Trump flags everywhere. so it's honestly, it's pretty good. It's chill, not a lot of division where I'm at. I live in a smaller city, and most people here that I've talked to are just ready for it to be over and want Trump to win. So,
and I will not put out too much information, but I know that you live in a state where that is not reflective of the overall political climate of the, I guess, majority of opinion, if you slice it a certain way. So
that's what I was going to say. I know you guys, your general states are very, very blue. So why would you say that the majority of people you know are hoping Trump wins? Well, is that just because of the sphere of people you hang out with?
No, I'm going to jump in on say this as well. Is if you're outside of the major metro area in either of these states, you are going to find a very different America than if you're anywhere within the proximity of the major metro areas. It very much is a rural versus.
State, though, right?
I would say it's extremely exacerbated here in these areas. You know, it's like you said, it's true everywhere, but I think in these particular states, you will see both ends of the spectrum extremely represented. And so, you know, there's a lot of volatility that comes from that. There's a few areas in which these, you know, ideas confer together. I actually live in a pretty purple area. There's a lot of military presence here, and we're also outside of a really major metro area that is leading the way left. And so with that, two forces coming together, you end up with a lot of people with a lot of strong opinions. But because of that, a lot of people don't actually want to share their opinions. And so it's kind of apathetic, really, would be the temperature that I would describe here. Less so than in previous elections. But it's kind of annoying in a way, because when you actually talk to people, they care, but you're not going to see as much demonstration of that as you would if you're in an area that's more dominantly left or right.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably pretty close to the people that I encounter on a daily basis. They don't really talk about it too much, but it's definitely, you can tell. I would say 9 out of 10 people are like, dude, F the governor. Well, that kind of gave some things. Well, actually, I didn't give too much away.
There's not many popular governors right now. I think you're safe.
I think I'm safe. Yeah, I had to go through that one in my head real quick. And they just want it to be done and over with. I just learned this, at least for our state.
And here he goes. He's going to give away everything.
This might be everything, but also I really don't care. The 4th is when the restrictions are going to be dropped in our state. So they reach the end of their mandate or whatever. And so after that, it's as long as there's no extension after that, as far as I'm concerned, people don't have to wear masks or do social distancing, even though there are some spikes in COVID happening in some of the surrounding counties.
Yeah, it's going to last a week.
Yeah. All right. So let's keep the conversation rolling. Chuck, John, go ahead and jump in. What's kind of the general temperature of where you're at?
Yeah. So I'm in the Midwest. I live in one of the swing states. So there's definitely a lot of back and forth, especially with where I'm at. I'm on the border of a county line where one of the county I moved away from is extremely blue. Everybody wants to go, demo. And then I moved into one of the suburbs that is just far enough that it crosses county lines. And our county, you're going to see big red Trump signs everywhere. And so it's kind of interesting being on the line. I can see a lot of back and forth. When I was in the more blue county, everybody was extremely vocal. And I'll just say this, by the way, as part of my profession, lawyers get really into politics, right? Everybody thinks, oh, I want to run for office someday. It's one of those pipe dreams that every attorney has to some degree. And so, I hear so much garbage back and forth, but especially in the bigger counties, it's constant stream of liberal propaganda.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, congratulations for escaping at least by a couple streets over. Patrick, what do you got?
Well, I'm in Arizona, and pretty much we're historically a red state. They keep saying we're moving more towards blue. I don't know how much of that I believe, but my personal observation of what I've seen at work and out on the street, it's about 50-50 divided right now. Could go either way. Yeah, I've just had a couple of people pass me with Trump flags and the Respect the Blue flag, I think it's called. You know, the one that's the American flag that's black and blue in the backs of their trucks. But yet a lot of the people like the Democrats for the healthcare and the, for lack of a better word, the welfare and the social help aspect. So pretty evenly divided. I would say I'm pretty confident that it's going to end up heading in a red direction, because I think a lot of Trump supporters these days, you have the ones that are driving the trucks and have the flags waving out the back, and they're going around, they're having rallies and everything else. But I think you have a lot of people that know if you throw a MAGA hat on, you might get your ass beat. It's that simple. There's been a lot of stuff like that. So I think a lot of people that support Trump are just kind of laying low, and they're going to make their voice heard at the polls. I know we've had record early voting, like major record early voting. The voter turnout has not been like this ever, as far as what I'm hearing on the news.
So let me just comment on Arizona real fast, because I'm looking at the historical polls. If you go all the way back to 1952, so we're talking 70 years of elections. The only time Arizona has ever gone blue was 1996. And even if you look at the 1964 election, which is basically the only election where blue fully dominated the map, even then Arizona was a red state. So I'm definitely not buying the idea that Arizona is turning blue anytime soon. But for some reason, the polls still show Biden's ahead by 2.6%, which according to, as far as I can tell, anytime Biden's ahead, you know, by whatever percent, add 7% to Trump, and that's the real poll number. So that's kind of where I predict. If they say Biden's ahead by 2.6%, that really means Trump's ahead by, you know, close to 5%.
Yeah, I'm pretty bullish on the Arizona question when it comes to that. I think that the gun rights are attracting the right kind of California refugees there, and I think a lot of California refugees on the left who are tired of being overtaxed, whatever, they're skipping over Arizona and going straight to Austin, Texas. So I think Texas is more of a battleground than it's being led on, and it has actually a longer history of having been a blue battleground state than Arizona in some regards. And John, you can fact check that, but I know that
so
when there was like the Democratic
actually,
South, that was a big part of it.
Texas, I see, has been blue 4 elections out of the last, in the last 70 years, versus Arizona's 1.
Yeah. So I'm actually much more interested in what's happening in Texas versus Arizona, because I think really what we're seeing when it comes to the mass exodus that's happened out of the failed state of California is that cancerous blob has just exploded and spread its goop all over the rest of the country. And so I think that's going to have a big impact on this election. So I'm not obviously very shy about sharing some of my opinions on these things. You can kind of guess where I'm coming from on this, but I think that there's a question here for Christians. There's been a lot of talk in the greater evangelical realm, however you want to slice that, about can a Christian vote for Trump? Is that a legitimate thing? Is it sinful? John Piper recently came out with an article where he essentially argued that reading between the lines a little bit, you shouldn't, because Trump is a meanie and he does other sins. And because Trump is a sinner and a meanie, I mean, he's causing people to sin, then you should really think hard about voting for him or not. He's gotten a lot of pushback from that.
Biden.
Right. I think it's very much a pandering to, I mean, he is in Minneapolis. I like John Piper for a lot of things, but his takes when it comes to political are about as cold as a Hillary Clinton victim. So I'm not particularly concerned about what he has to say, but he has a large voice in the greater, more conservative side of the evangelical picture. So, gentlemen, sounds like a lot of you guys are pulling for Trump here. What say you to Mr. Piper or others of his milieu who think that Trump is a big meanie and that voting for him is problematic?
Well, I saw Todd Friel's Wretched Radio response about that. And basically he says, you know, it's one thing when you're talking about the people. It's another thing when you're talking about the policies and the laws. And policies and laws can be changed. People, heart has to change. That's a lot more difficult, longer, involved process that involves the Holy Spirit. But when it comes to our affairs within the community, laws are what we should focus on. Yes, of course, we want godly leaders, but what can we do with our votes? We can affect policy, and that's what we should be focusing on. Of course, we should be trying to pick the most godly person, but the most godly person still has to affect policy. And it's
even
policy.
that, I think I would challenge that.
I think I would too, but go for it, John.
Pick the most godly person tells me that you're voting based on a person's character still, right? And so what happens if you have a guy who has a really godly character, looks a lot like Jesus, but at the same time is completely on all the wrong sides of political issues? Just because he has a great character doesn't mean he's going to make wise decisions. So in that sense, I would far more prefer, and what we're voting for when we vote for a president, right, is not for the person's character or their personal moral lifestyle, but instead we're voting for their positions on different issues. If we were in a dictatorship, completely different story, right? If this were a dictatorship, there are certainly elections where I would have voted very differently. But we don't have that situation. We have a president who has very clearly defined roles throughout the Constitution and, you know, all kinds of laws and regulations that we have over what the president can and can't do. And because of that, we're voting for who can make the best decisions consistent with what we value as people, with the powers that are given to the person in office. So we're not voting for the person based on their character. You can be a truly awful person, but if you're going to make the wise decisions that's going to end up creating the right decision making within the mechanisms that the Constitution gives, that's what matters.
I think Chuck was implying that a guy that has godly character and is running as a politician would also implement godly policy and godly laws.
No, what I was saying is I think that was John Piper's point, is we should focus on the character of the person. And I actually agree exactly with what you're saying, John, is that we should focus more on how they're going to implement policy and how they're going to decide on policy. When I go to the polls and I place my vote, I don't look at what I think of a person. I have guides and resources that I look at their voting record on the issues that matter to me. Now, you can't get it on every single person on the ballot, so sometimes it's a toss-up, but on most of the major candidates, you look at their position on abortion, you look at their position on a lot of different things. I'm going to go into each one, but there's about a group of 10 that are really important for Christians, one way or the other. And you look at these people and you can say whatever you want about their platform, about their character, about their personality. But what it comes down to is when they had to vote, how did they vote? And if more people would look at the candidates' voting records and see how they actually voted on the issues when it came down to it, they would have a clearer picture and a better idea of who to vote for that'll actually uphold, or hopefully uphold, some of those values based on not what they say, but what they do.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in and just say, I think in 2016, there was a reasonable skepticism that Christians could have about Donald Trump as the commander in chief, as the executive, as the president, because he didn't have a voting record. You know, he was coming from outside the system. For all we knew, that he was just pandering to evangelicals, pandering to Christians to try and get a vote, and then he was going to he's going to put in the worst Supreme Court justices we could have possibly imagined. And I think there was a real fear that he was being a showman and he was just a charlatan. I think now that we have 3 and some change years of history, that you can't say that anymore as a Christian. I think that you have to look at that record and see what's happened. And I think even if you're a single issue voter, you're looking at the abortion question, you're looking at whatever your issue is, if you're at all reading the same Bible I am, I can't see you supporting a Democratic candidate with the record that we have for Trump supporting religious freedom. Just that issue alone, I think, means that we now have more room as Christians to be Christians. And that's super important. Obviously. And so I would say if anybody's on the fence about that, first of all, I don't know anybody on the fence anymore, so maybe it's a moot point. But if you are on the fence, I would strongly urge you to consider the record when it comes to your ability to exercise your religion and consider who's going to allow that to happen more. I'm going to echo Doug Wilson. He recently, I think this morning, put out a post about this very issue. And essentially, he makes a distinction rightfully between sins and crimes. And Donald Trump, like anyone, has a long list of sins that you can point to, but his sins aren't the criminal kind, biblically speaking. And what he is supporting is the ability for Christians to exercise their religion in a way that would be otherwise criminal in some capacity under various different democratic leaders. So take it for what you will.
Well, and I think there's two sides of the coin. I think there's two sides of the coin to consider too. When you're talking about Donald Trump in 2016, it wasn't so much a vote for Donald Trump as it was a vote against Hillary Clinton and all the things Hillary Clinton stood for. And I think that's equally as important. You may not have a good bead on what this person will do, but if the person is running against them is going for all the things that you're against, then, well, sometimes the unknown is better than the unknown. That is a horrible choice. And you should take a gamble on that person with your vote rather than vote for the person that you know is going to make all the wrong decisions. And I think that is just as important.
Yeah,
so
I think
this
we
raises
see that
some
actually.
questions that I have in comparison to the last election, especially, right? So with the vote against Hillary, the first question, that there's no doubt in my mind that Joe Biden is a crooked and corrupt man. I've seen enough to know that there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that I really just don't trust the guy. That being said, if he has that specific starting point, is it really as bad as Hillary? I don't think he's quite as corrupt as Hillary was. And so he has some kind of edge there. But at the same time, even though he may have a little bit of an edge over Hillary in the sense that he's not as crooked as she might have been, on the flip, Donald Trump has the extra advantage that the last election, what I remember seeing is everybody saying, oh, if Donald Trump wins, he's going to fire nukes over at North Korea and we're going to be in World War III. Right? Everybody sees that hasn't happened now, right? The other thing people are saying, okay, well, if Donald Trump wins, he's going to take away gay marriage. Okay, that hasn't actually happened either. He's going to stop your right to abortion. Okay, that hasn't happened either. So basically, all of these threats that were scaring the Democrats into saying, oh, we need to stand up against Donald Trump has now proven that it's not actually a viable threat. And so even though there are some advantages that Joe Biden might have over Hillary in the battle against Donald Trump, there are some significant advantages that he has in the sense that a lot of the threats that people were using, they realized, oh yeah, that really wasn't as big of a deal as we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think you're appealing to the idea of a rational leftist. And of course, this isn't going to be a blanket statement that's true of absolutely everyone. There was a couple of people that I'm well acquainted with who they are rational to a certain degree, but they absolutely hate Trump, even worse than when things were back in 2016, because they do buy into a lot of the media. And what's funny is the ones that are most vehement that I know against Trump is because of not what the media says and lies about him, but because of what he's actually doing. The issue isn't that, oh, well, Trump is going to take away what we perceive as our liberal rights. It's that, you know, everything that he stands for is antithetical to their worldview, and they're right about that. And so I think that there still is a galvanized leftist just rejection of the idea of Trump. And I actually think we see an inverse of 2016 where we have, in the same way that people weren't necessarily voting for Trump, they were voting against Hillary. I think the left right now, nobody's really for Biden. I mean, there's a handful of weirdos who think that he's actually going to be a good president, but we have a left that's basically built up of people who are against Trump, versus you look at the rallies and the grassroots like Trump truck parades and stuff like that. People are stoked about Donald Trump in a way that you couldn't even imagine. I mean, just put on your thinking cap here for a second. Could you imagine a bunch of people sitting around saying, you know what we need to do? We need to get in our Priuses and we need to get some really big Biden flags. And then we need to go drive around Portland, and we got to go drive around San Francisco. We got to go drive around, you know, Dallas. And we're going to just go and show our support for Biden. No, it's insane to think, because people don't actually like him. His own supposed base, they don't really like Biden. They might like Harris a little bit more, but they just hate Trump that much. So I think we're actually seeing an inverting of what happened in 2016. But I think that the edge that Trump has is there's a lot of people who are, you know, never Trumpers, or people who are in the middle, who they didn't like Trump because of his unknown qualities, and because things have gotten so crazy, and Trump has, generally speaking, been pretty level about most of his responses to these things. I think that there's a groundswell of support for Trump in people who didn't see it last time. I have family members who they didn't vote for Trump last time. They don't like the man at all, but they're so disgusted by what's happening and what the left is pushing and what the Democratic platform looks like, that they're like, well, I'm voting for Trump this time. I don't like him, but I hate the alternative. So there's still, you know, some of that going on that I think is going to be the edge. Plus, he's polling for whatever polls are worth, and I don't think they're worth much, but he's polling really well with some of the growing minority populations, you know, Hispanics in Arizona, for example. There's been some very promising polls that they want Trump, not Biden, because, hey, guess what? Taxes suck for everyone.
Well, and then you have the competency and the lucidity issue too. Donald Trump, 74, he just hit 6 states in a single day, and dude is like unstoppable as far as his energy. And yeah, he's hoarse at this point. You know, his voice is definitely starting to show the strain, but he hit 6 states. Joe Biden, they keep showing these videos of him. Well, the thing. And there's tons of those kinds of incidents where he's just kind of lost track of whatever he was saying. Hey, we all get those from time to time. But boy, for a politician that wants to be in the most powerful position in this entire world, he has a lot of them. And 4 years older.
Yeah. Well, I think a handful of thoughts on it. First of all, I don't think a lot of people have any illusion that they're really voting for Biden. I think that they realize that there's a Harris play involved in that as well. But I think there's something that's really interesting. And if the left didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any at all. But, you know, how much did you hear about, well, Trump sounds like an idiot. He can barely talk. He's representing America. And the guy sounds like, you know, a 7th grader. Well, and then their main candidate here that they're running against him also has a trouble, you know, speaking and actually being coherent. So I think personally, I find that a little bit funny and highly disingenuous. Okay, so
let's move on for a second. I want to real fast. We have our token single guy from a single man's perspective.
Listen to you being all on topic.
Levi. No, I'm just teasing him because really, in theory, being single versus married shouldn't have too much impact on the whole conversation. But Levi has been a little quiet, so I kind of want to hear from you, man.
Oh, yeah. I just think it's really interesting that most of the people that support Biden are actually, especially men, speaking specifically to men here, are low testosterone individuals. Been doing some research on hormones and the different roles they play in everything, and it's. I kind of think that Trump might actually be on testosterone replacement therapy, like a legit under medical supervision. After you're over a certain age, your testosterone just starts declining. With that, like energy levels, mental clarity levels. There's a lot of the more research I'm doing, the more like, okay, so one interesting thing is that 50 years ago, men used to have double, if not triple the amount of testosterone in their body as average guys do today. And so it would almost and a lot of this has to do with like, it sounds kind of woo-woo-y, but literally electromagnetic frequencies, cell phone waves and stuff like that disrupt hormones in your body. Like they can cause all these bad things, different chemicals in the drinking waters, things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, if we were on a radio, if we were on a radio show right now where we had real drops, this would definitely be where I'd push the button where Alex Jones yells out, "They're turning the frickin' frogs gay."
But so he's not floating the 5G tower theory, is he?
The 5G tower. Well, it's still a disruptor. It's still a endocrine disruptor. But just looking at things, and same with John Piper. John Piper seems like the epitome of an individual with low testosterone. And I 100% believe that if guys had normal levels of testosterone, and normal not by the standards that they're applying right now, they've actually dumbed down the standards. They literally, there's two corporations that are in charge of like setting the measuring standards for testosterone, and they actually brought those down so that people with like low testosterone would be more in the normal range.
Yeah.
So I think that go ahead.
So one thing I will say is, and we're kind of rabbit trailing here, and I want to try and keep us on the topic of the election. No, but I think it's a good point in the sense of, if I were a malevolent person in charge of the mechanisms of society and I wanted to create a docile and complacent population, I definitely wouldn't encourage their testosterone levels. It definitely serves you to have people who are more compliant, people who are less aggressive and less willing to buck the system. So, I mean, that's like, we can have a tinfoil hat, after hours episode or something, and I would love to have that. But I do think there's something to be said about, I really think that there's a lot of support for Trump from the male individuals. If you look at, there was a 2016 map spreads that showed demographic voting trends. And if you were to just take men, Trump would have won by a massive margin, absolutely humongous margin. But if you were to just take women, he would have lost by like a record margin. And so there definitely is a difference when it comes to the sexes, and clearly hormones play a difference in that as well. So I definitely
just to
agree
address
with
that issue
idea.
real fast. I find this interesting. So there's this is kind of what I've been trying to pull up here. An article, it's a scholarly journal article on ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, whatever that means. But the abstract starts off with the background. Political elections are dominance competitions. When men win a dominance competition, their testosterone levels rise or remain stable to resist a circadian decline. And when they lose, their testosterone levels fall. However, it is unknown whether this pattern of testosterone change extends beyond interpersonal competitions, meaning one where you're directly involved, to the vicarious experience of winning or losing in the context of political elections. And so just to skip from the background to the conclusion section of this abstract, it says, the findings indicate that male voters exhibit biological responses to the realignment of a country's dominance hierarchy as if they participated in an interpersonal dominance contest themselves. What do you guys make of that?
I believe that.
100%. Yeah.
And if you just walk around and you look at a guy and you can assess that he's high T, you're probably going to find a Trump voter. I mean, it's just, I've lived in both kind of communities, and it just is the way it is. And you see articles coming out from, leftist news sites where, gym goers are likely to be, white supremacist males who are going to support Trump and all the rest of it. And there's multiple articles about this.
This doesn't even seem to be pushing the idea of a testosterone alignment toward a particular political party. What I'm gathering is that when you win, your testosterone levels spike. So does that mean if Biden wins, all of those, estrogen boys who were siding with the Democratic Party are suddenly going to get an insurgence of testosterone and kind of rub it in everybody's faces and like, oh yeah, we won.
I honestly think the answer to that is probably yes, but I think when we're looking at this as a factor, it's probably not going to change their lives very much. But I think that what I'm getting at is, I think there's an alignment of, if you want to win, I think you're biologically predisposed to choosing your champion, if you will, to be somebody who's formidable. And I mean, it's not the case, and I kind of wish it was. If we were to throw Donald Trump and Joe Biden in the Thunderdome tomorrow and let them duke it out, and that's our president, would anybody vote for Biden? No, I mean, it
Yeah.
would be the worst over under ever. And, Vegas would have a field day. But really, I think that the biological predisposition for any man is going to look at Trump and say, yeah, he's the champion I want against Biden in this contest. I mean, and he's more likely to be the formidable foe here. And so I think that's where you see that alignment happening on this side. But yeah, I think if you win, even if your candidate's a, Joe Biden character, yeah, you probably get a boost out of that a little bit. But you never know.
So answer, I guess, to go back to John's question, answer as a single guy, like, definitely voting for Trump. I don't want a culture where it's going to promote #MeToo and Black Lives Matter movement. It's literally going to affect my sexual mating strategy, where now, approaching a girl and saying, hey, like, I think you're good looking and would love to, go do XYZ with you, whatever.
Is that what kids are calling it now?
Yeah, you're the same age as me. But
go to my wife. Hey, do you want to do some XYZ today?
Hell yeah.
XYZ. Hey, I guess next time I
OMG.
go ask a girl.
OMG, let's XYZ. I totally agree with you, Levi, though. I think that when you look at the world in which, Trump's president or Biden's president, if I was even if I was just a secular dude and I was thinking like, which is going to improve my odds of, my mating strategy being successful, I think that a place in which Trump is president is going to be more advantageous to me. I mean, especially when you look at some of the indoctrination that is coming out on campuses, which is basically like, hey, if you're a white guy, you are the absolute worst person that has ever existed. Oh, and if you're a white guy who's a Christian, you're even worse. Oh, and if you're straight, you're even worse. And, you just go down the list. And a lot of our, subreddit user base would probably fall in the category of literally Hitler by most definitions of the left. And so I think it would serve everybody to consider that, because I don't think a Biden presidency and the type of policies directed by that are going to be helpful. So we're getting toward time here. So I want to push out we've talked a little bit about just our overviews of the election. So fallout. No surprise, major metro areas are boarding up all their shops. People have long been saying this is going to be a hotly contested election that probably won't be actually known the results tomorrow. And, accusations of voter fraud aside, the reality is there's a good chance that we're going to see some massive social unrest, anywhere from what we've seen already all the way up to full-scale civil war, depending on who you're reading. What do we do? What should we advise anybody who's listening to this consider while being prepared for that?
Realistically, there's not going to be any type of civil war, right? If there was going to be one, it would have been in the Trump-Hillary election. The fact that Trump's already been a president for as long as he has and no civil war has broken out tells me if he's wins again, nobody's going to riot over that. If Biden wins, I really don't see, generally speaking, the people who are throwing hissy fits over these things are the Democrats anyway, right? You don't see these major Republican protests, not my president. Right. So we're not going to find any of that stuff if Biden wins. And if Trump wins, I just don't see anybody riling up and saying, oh, but Biden, we were so sold on Biden. They weren't. They were sold on Hillary. And I could see why there would have been that type of a pushback in the 2016 election. I just don't catch that vibe today.
Something interesting I kind of want to explore is if Biden does win and the feminist agenda does keep going, defund the police, things like that, what do you guys think the ramifications are like following that trajectory? Where do you see like feminism and the red pill and things like that going?
Well, I mean, the end game is it's illegal to have a penis unless you have a license. I'm being facetious a little bit, but I mean, it's not a good direction for anything.
Arizona's concealed carry laws, they're pretty liberal, so we're okay.
I think that's a lot of like looking into a crystal ball, and I think that we can make some good speculation, wanting to keep things kind of more on the immediate. I would push against what John said a little bit in saying that I think that things are more tumultuous and more volatile than it may seem, in the sense of we've just had a year where people have been practicing the rioting and getting away with it. Living near, I mean, at the time I was living in a suburb of Portland, and it was an absolute shitstorm. And, that was even that, right at the time, people were freaking out and thinking it was a big deal. And that looks tame in comparison to the rioting we've seen since the George Floyd issue. And so I think a lot of that has emboldened people to act more recklessly if things don't go the way they want. We have a lot of people who are unemployed and frankly bored. And I don't think if people, yeah, you're right, they're not that stoked about Biden, but man, do they hate Trump. And I think that the idea of we need to resist it by any means necessary, I think it'll be localized, but I think that the reality of there being severe civil unrest to the point of violence is not something that we ought to discount wholesale. If you're living near one of those areas where this has already happened, I think that's a good situation where you should be maybe making plans to not be around there for a little while. Take a vacation, hit an Airbnb out in the country, see what happens. Hopefully I'm wrong, but if it's already happened there's a good sign that people are going to want to, start something, because if you believe the rhetoric that Trump is, quote, literally Hitler, then wouldn't it be justified to do anything about it?
Yeah, I think that if there are riots though, and Trump is, because there'll only be riots, massive riots, if Trump's elected, if there is a riot. And
yeah, I don't see right wingers going crazy if Biden gets elected and start shooting people.
But I think at that point, since he's like, okay, there's no risk, I'm going to go ahead and send the feds in, kind of like he did with Portland. I didn't follow it too heavy, but I knew he withdrew. But for a while, it was like there was actually legitimate resistance to, the BLM rioters and all the people, I guess, doing the tearing
Antifa,
stuff down.
Yeah.
So I think that if there is ramifications, that they'll be flexed on and it will kind of cool down. There will probably be some collateral damage. I don't think it'll be anything that can't be repaired.
Yeah,
I find it interesting also the way that the conversation has changed. I remember, just several years ago, people were talking about that Texas was most likely going to secede and create its own country and civil war and all that, right?
Don't threaten me with a good time.
What's that?
I said, don't threaten me with a good time.
Right. But at the same time, now we're flipping the conversation and saying the Democrats are the ones who want to secede. It's interesting to see how the back and forth goes, where when, you have Barack Obama in power and all of a sudden Texas is going to go, and then you have somebody like Trump in power, and now all of a sudden California is going to be, maybe we need to cut ourselves off and throw ourselves into the ocean.
See, I don't think that that's a fair comparison. And this is going to be like really lame, but conservatives suck at conserving anything because mostly they're a bunch of pussies who want to do like action by proxy, and so they'll vote for somebody to do action for them. Leftists, at least the extreme left, has shown a propensity to want to actually get physical about things and to do more than just talk about it. And the difference is they get legal cover for that. I mean, they have mayors and prosecutors and attorneys on retainer ready to defend them if they do actually act out what they're saying they're going to do. And so I think that there's an emboldening that's happened there. And again, I hope I'm wrong. I anticipate, so if this is my just final word on prediction here, I think that there's going to be some major civil unrest in some local metro areas. If it burns out and it fizzles out, that's the end of it. More years of Trump. If it continues on and it isn't stopped, it's going to spread. Be ready.
Go get your concealed carry, guys.
Yeah, a little late for that. All right, well, we're at time here, so thank you guys. It'll be interesting to see if any of our prognostications actually end up turning out, but see you on the other side. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
LA.